So in today's video, this video is going to be about how I updated this character, making this pumpkin character look a bit more rustic and a bit more weathered, and as well how I made this replacement skeleton head for the character and how that's fully animatable for stop motion. So if you want to see how I originally made this character, or how I made the two main characters from Over the Garden Wall, check that out because I've made videos on each one of those. I'll have the links in the description for those videos on how I made those characters. And just to let you know, there is a giveaway in this video, and that is if you comment on this video, you can actually win one of these spare skeleton heads that I made. So if you want to win that, just comment down below on this video. So this character is based on the pumpkin characters from the Over the Garden Wall TV show, and it's from the Pottsfield episode. But because I made this character 2 years ago, what I wanted to do was update the character for a fun Halloween project. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about how I updated the paint job on this character to make it look a little bit more rustic and a little bit more weathered. So I separated the character into all of its individual parts, and I'm just painting it with Earthshade paint from Citadel Paints. And it's really good for painting on stuff to make it look like it's covered in mud or even machining grease if we're painting something that's metal. So I'm just painting this onto the parts of the character, specifically the feet and the hands. So I'm just trying to make this character look a bit more textured, making it look like it's just walked through a muddy field. And I'm also painting the pumpkin to look a bit more weathered, making it look like it's actually grown in a field. So I'm kind of deviating from the show where it's got a nice clean surface. So I'm just painting this on and stifling the surface, and I'm just adding this on just by tapping the surface. And then for areas like the stripes, I'm just painting this on like normal, being quite light with it because I don't want it to be too extreme. And I'm also painting it over the teeth as well because this paint is quite nice and transparent and it seeps into all the little cracks and the gaps between the teeth. I've probably gone a little bit overboard with all the weathering that I've done, but it's one of my favourite things to paint, making stuff look weathered and quite muddy. And then what I've done is just sprayed it with a lacquer, and that just kind of protects the paintwork from getting scratched off. Then moving on to the skeleton head. So how I started off making this was having it in Blender. So like everything that I sculpt, I start off with a cube in Blender. And what I'm doing as I'm sculpting this is looking at the reference image, just so I can make this quite accurate to the show. And as I'm sculpting this out, I'm making separate parts for each part. So I'm going to be keeping the skull, the jaw, and the spine separate. And after being happy with the sculpt, what I've done is taken it into Fusion 360, which is a really good CAD software, and then what I've done is positioned it right next to the original pumpkin sculpt in this software, and see how well this is going to interact with the character, and I can see if there's any issues with this not working, but I'm just working with what's already designed on this puppet, and that's because my current plan with this character is to take this spine that I've sculpted, and that's going to slot onto the wire of this pumpkin's neck. And at the top of this sculpted spine, there is a wire connection that goes from the spine into the skull, and that just makes it where the skull is connected to the spine and is able to be animated. And if you look here, there is this selected blue shape, and this blue shape is going to make a hole inside the skull, and that just makes it where there's a bigger space for motion inside the skull, so I can actually pose this, so it's less restrictive whilst I'm animating. And if we look at the jaw, I've added in these little holes, and these little holes are going to be little wire holes. And that just makes it where I can glue this wire into the jaw and into the skull, and it just makes the jaw fully poseable, so I'm able to pose it wherever I want. And if you look here, you can see the jaw is selected in 3 different places. So the one on the left is the max forward position, the one in the middle is the middle position, which is the normal relaxed position, and the one on the right is the max backwards position, and that's just mapping out the range of movement that I want on this jaw. So I can actually cut a channel into the skull and make it where the jaw can slide inside, and what that means is that it's got enough room inside where it can be animated moving backwards and forwards, so the full range of the jaw can be animated in this hole. Then what I'm going to do is 3D print off my designs, but there is a little issue that I just want to highlight, and that's because there is a risk of creating suction cups as they're getting printed. And what this is sometimes when you're printing, you can accidentally make an enclosed shape, and what that can do is make an uneven pressure, and because of this you've basically made a suction cup, and that just means that it could rip off the build plate as you're printing, which will obviously cause printing errors. So to avoid it being printed wrong, what you need to do is make little pressure holes, and that's just so the pressure can escape through these little holes. It's a really easy fix to do, So I'm going to make a load of little holes where I think all these suction cups are going to get created. But with that fully fixed, what I'm going to do is print this off on my resin printer. And this is what it looks like after it's been printed. So I've printed it with transparent resin just because that's what I'm using for another project. And it's come out really nice. You can see all these internal channels are fully visible because of the transparent resin. And these were the little holes that I made to release any pressure whilst it's getting printed. And if I turn this around, you can see all the holes in the back as well. And these little holes are going to be where the wire gets glued in, so the jaw and the head can actually be animated. So if I take the jaw and pose it inside, you can see how well it fits. And just moving this around, I can already tell there's enough room inside where it's not going to scratch off the paint. And I'm just trying to get a good idea of the range of motion it's going to have. And I think this is going to work great to animate. Then what I'm going to do is grab the spine, and I'm just testing this out to make sure it slides onto the neck, just so I can get a good idea of the range of motion it's going to have. And I'm doing this just to make sure it fits. And I can just do a little rotation test that's just twisting the wire inside. And that's going to be if we want to animate the character's head turning. And yeah, I think this will work quite well for the character. So before I can paint this, what I need to do is remove any leftover support material. And then what I'm doing is just sanding it down, making sure everything's really nice and smooth. So skipping ahead, I've already spray painted these with a white primer. And that's just to give the paint a nice foundation to sit on, something to bond onto and cling onto. And then before I paint this, what I'm going to do is make a little makeshift handle. What I'm going to do is push these little cocktail sticks into the head, and that's directly into these little holes. And these little holes are the ones that I made when I was setting up the printing. So doing it this way does make sure that your paintwork stays protected from yourself. So to start off, what I'm doing is that I'm just painting this black paint into the eye sockets. And I'm doing this first because I know I'm going to have to repaint certain areas of this, because I'm going to be doing a black wash over the teeth. And that's just so the black goes into all the sculpted little details between the teeth, and it would be really difficult to paint if I was just trying to do that with a brush. So after I do the black wash, what I'm going to do is just wipe this off, and what should happen is that all the black has gone into all the little sculpted details between the teeth. The white around it is a little bit stained and a bit darkened from the black, so I'm going to have to repaint some of this. But it's a lot easier compared to having to do delicate paintwork between the teeth. So what I'm doing is just repainting this, and then what I'm doing is just tidying up the eyes, cleaning up this black area in the holes of the eyes. And I'm doing this just because I want to get a nice clean line between the white and the black. I'm then repeating all of this for the lower jaw. I'm giving it a black wash to go between all the gaps between the teeth, and then I'm repainting this with some highlights, just to kind of pick out the bone and the teeth again. So I'm adding highlights onto each tooth individually. So I'm just painting this on really carefully because I don't want this to get into any of the black areas between the teeth. And after painting this is how it all looks. So what I'm going to be doing is doing a little giveaway. So one of these skeleton heads I'm going to be giving away down in the comments below. But I'm also going to be giving away a second one on my Patreon for my free members. So if you want a random chance of winning that, just sign up for that for free. And you get access to free learning resources on there for stop motion. So yeah, that's how you enter this free giveaway. Now back to the video. And then after painting all this and being happy with the paintwork, what I'm going to do is spray this with a matte lacquer. And that's just to give it a protective coat and stop any of the paint getting scratched off when it's getting handled. And now all the paintwork is protected. So what I'll be doing next is making the wire to connect the parts together. So I'm starting off with these 3 wires that I'm going to twist together with my hands. And this wire is going to be at the top of the spine, connecting the spine to the skull. So I'm just twisting this together with my hands, and then I'm cutting it down to the size that I need, so I'm just trimming it off at both ends, just so it's got a nice clean cut. And then moving on to the next piece of wire, this piece of wire is going to go into the jaw, and this is a double twist of wire with a little loop on the end. So what I'm going to do is just start cutting this down to size, and then what I'm doing is just trimming off one side of the loop, and then I'm just straightening out this wire. So just to explain what I've done with this wire, the thicker end that's using 2 pieces of wire will plug into the skull because it's got a larger hole where it can be glued into, but this smaller piece at the end is just one single piece of wire. And that's because the jaw is really narrow and it can't fit multiple pieces of wire inside, so it does need to be a single piece of wire. So I'm just going to add a little bit of super glue onto this before I move on, just so the wire doesn't untwist itself because it is really short. So after this, what I'm going to finally do is start gluing all the parts together. And for this, I'm going to be using a 5-minute epoxy glue that's super strong. And this is a 2-part glue, so you just want to mix these two together. Then what I'm doing is adding the glue onto the wire that's going to go into the skull for the jaw. And I'm just placing this very carefully inside into the hole. And after doing that for both sides, what I'm going to do is move on to the jaw. So I'm just adding some glue onto the jaw, placing it into the holes. And then I'm very carefully trying to slot this onto the wire. It is difficult to slot this inside because the holes are so small, so I'm just being really careful as I'm doing this. And then what I'm doing is just gluing this wire directly into the base of the skull. And this is the spine wire that goes from the spine to the head. Then after letting the glue set, what I'm doing is just adding on a bit more glue onto this wire, and then slotting on the spine onto that glue. And then after letting all the glue dry, what I've done is glued a little breast tube into the base of the spine. And that's just so it can slide onto the neck of the character and be posed, but locked in place. Then finally what I'm going to do after finishing everything else is that I'm going to add on the eyes. And once again I am using a reference from the show to base this character on, just so it's quite accurate to the show. And these eyes are made from white milliput, which is just an epoxy clay, so you just mix it together and sculpt whatever you want. So I've made a load of little eyes, just so I've got plenty of choices on what size to use. So to have them stick onto the character and still have them movable, what I've done is put a thin layer of tacky wax on it. And that's just so when I put the eye on, it actually sticks to the character. And I can move it quite freely around the eye, just because it's stuck to the wax. And this can be fully posed and animated if I wanted to. And with all that said, this character is now finished. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. I think it looks great, especially with how poseable the character is with its jaw and its head movements. I'm excited to eventually animate this guy because it just looks really fun to animate. But sadly, I'm running out of time to post this before Halloween, so I'm going to post this before I can actually get around to animating it. If you want to see me eventually get around to animating this, you should subscribe because it will eventually happen. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Also, make sure you comment on the video just so you can get entered in the giveaway of one of these skeleton heads. But if you want to learn more about stop motion or 3D print this character, all the files for that will be on my Patreon. And with all that said, have a great day.